This lesson is about the apostrophe, which is not the punctuation mark, but a poetic device. Now, the apostrophe is a rhetorical device in the same way as a rhetorical question is a rhetorical device. People often think a rhetorical question is just a question to which there is no answer necessary. It's not really the point. It has a rhetorical effect. In other words, when you speak, it has a certain effect on a certain person. Now, the apostrophe is used in literature, mainly in drama, but also in poetry, for dramatic effect. Okay, we'll look at that in detail now. So, what is an apostrophe then? Firstly, it is a direct address. In other words, you are speaking to an entity, a person or a thing directly, right? So you are directly addressing either an individual, and the individual might be present or the individual might be absent, but you are addressing that person, or it can be an inanimate object. It needn't necessarily be a person. It can be a present or a non-present person, but also an object such as a dagger or a skull or something. Or it can be an abstract concept that you are addressing directly. But what is clear there is that there is a speaker, there is an I there addressing the other person or object. And that, of course, the one that's spoken to is the addressee, be it a dagger, be it a sun, or whatever it is, right? Is the addressee. It is found most commonly in plays. Now, in plays, the function is more or less, apart from the dramatic effect that it has, that you address something directly, is that it serves as a kind of an aside. In other words, you're on stage and you suddenly turn away, perhaps from the person that's with you, and you address whatever you're addressing. And you are saying things. But an aside is not supposed to be heard by other people on the stage, but it's heard by the audience. So whatever you say will actually be your thoughts spoken out loud, which the rest of the company on the stage won't hear. It's a dramatic convention. They won't hear it. But the audience hears it. And then, of course, they have that knowledge about you that you have just expressed in this little aside or in this address that you've made to whatever you've been talking about. Because what it expresses really is a piece of your mind, something that you are thinking. So, in other words, the audience will get to know your inner thoughts over and above what you are pretending to be out here or saying out here, also what's going on inside. So it creates a kind of dramatic tension that an aside normally does, right? So it is for dramatic effect and sometimes for dramatic irony, where the audience knows more than the other people on the stage, right? So, but it sometimes also occurs in poetry. So we're going to look at that as well. Now, looking at poetry first, for instance, in a poem by John Donne, which is a prayer for violence, we see that John Donne addresses God directly. This is an apostrophe. There is a clear speaker there, an I and a me there, I, and then there's an addressee, which is, of course, God. So he addresses God directly because he wants to invoke the presence of God. God is an abstract concept. It's abstract. He cannot have God next to him right here. So bringing him into the poem, he can now address God immediately. And it is a prayer for violence. He wants to ask God something. He says, please God, batter my heart. And who am I asking this from? Three-personed God, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, right? Three-personed God. For you, as yet but knock, breathe, and shine and seek to mend. So in other words, you have not battered me. You have just sort of touched me in ways it hasn't really shaken me. That I may rise and stand. If you start battering me, I can rise and stand. He says, overthrow me and bend your force and break, blow, burn me so that I can become new. He's asking God to do that to him. So it's a prayer for violence. So what you can see here is that we have, for dramatic effect and for a more intimate talk with God, we are invoking his presence into the poem and asking him even more directly than directly to please do this now. It's urgent. I want that done to me. And I want you here because it's a physical thing I want. I want to be battered. I want to feel it, right? So that's the apostrophe, an example in a poem. We can look at another example by Donne, Death Be Not Proud, where John Donne wants a little chin wag. He wants to talk to death. He wants to have a little conversation with death and tell death exactly what he thinks of him, because he's going to personify death as a person, right? Because if you are talking to death directly, you are personifying death, because death can now hear and listen to what you have to say. So he wants this argument with death, and he wants to actually prove in this argument to death that death, who thinks is so great and mighty, he can overthrow people and kill them off, has no power at all. So he wants this argument. Now, in order for him to have this argument sort of face to face, he invokes the presence. That is the function of the apostrophe. Apart from the dramatic effect, you invoke the presence of that object or aspect or person into the poem so that you can confront him sort of face to face in an argument. And that is the point here. He says, death, can you see how he directly addresses death? Be not proud. Though some have called thee mighty and dreadful, for thou art not so. For those whom thou think'st thou dost overthrow, die not, poor death, nor yet canst thou kill me. So can you see he puts himself in battle with death here, but in an argumentative battle. So you think you can kill me? Ha, I'm telling you you can't, right? So what happens here is the poet or the speaker is in the one who speaks then and addresses somebody, and whom he addresses is personified death, personified and brought into the poem, invoked the presence of, right? He speaks directly for dramatic effects, and he invokes the presence of the other party into the argument. So you can see the function of it and why it is effective. Okay, just the apostrophe in this poem. Then we're going to look at the apostrophe in drama, because it's very commonly used. As I said just now to you, that it has the function more or less of an aside, and for dramatic tension and for dramatic irony, for instance. So this has been part of the storytelling since Greek drama, right? They've been using this this method of sort of breaking from a scene and people around, looking perhaps another way, starting with something like oh or you or whatever, but addressing in a dramatic way somebody else, talking and actually just revealing a lot of your own inner psyche to the audience, but obviously not to the other players on the stage, as I said. So it was often used at the time, and it provides a way for the storyteller to quickly switch gears. So the moment the audience now start thinking, oh, what is he thinking now? He tells them how he's thinking, but the people around him won't know what he's saying. And it includes the commentary or the inner world of the person addressing that whatever it is. It very often it begins with it's often an exclamation. You'll find the exclamation marks there. So it starts usually with an exclamatory sound, oh, or something. And it signifies, that word oh signifies that, oh, here's a change, here's a shift, here's a changing of gear, right? So that there's a change in addressee. I'm not talking to the person next to me on stage, I'm just owing into a void, right? Talking there. So you are addressing a person, as I said, or an object, or an abstract concept who is not present or present, that you are addressing directly. It also can be an inanimate object, as we said, that cannot feel or express emotions, but you express your own emotions and you give your ideas about that thing. The main thing to remember, as I said, as is also the function of the soliloquy and the aside in a drama, is that you get to know the inner world of the character, which in turn allows the audience to know more than the characters on stage. It creates tension there, dramatic tension, because the audience now start getting worked up because, oh dear, we know he's going to do that because he's just thought it, but he's being very cool and casual here with his character whom he's actually planning to kill or something. So it creates that dramatic tension. It can have that effect, right? Now, for instance, in Hamlet, we see that Hamlet strolls through the graveyard, right, with his friend Horatio. And then the clowns dig up a skull of Yorick, who is a court jester. And then what Hamlet now does is he picks up the skull. He picks up the skull and he addresses it directly. So he now talks to a skull, which is inanimate, which cannot talk back, which doesn't have feelings, who cannot hear, but he is now going to say something to the skull. And in doing that, he is going to reveal something about what is plaguing him inside. You remember, he's thinking of life and death, to be or not to be, and all of that. So he is revealing something that's going on through his brain. So obviously, when he picks up a skull, he's thinking of death, and death was constantly on his mind. So he says, alas, poor Yorick. So he's not talking to anybody on the stage. He has the skull in his hand and he's addressing the skull. Can you see? It's something totally different. It is an apostrophe. And he says, alas, poor Yorick, I knew him, Horatio. So he says, alas, poor Yorick, sorry about that. And then he speaks to Horatio again and he says, I knew him, he was a fellow of infinite jest. But you're going to see as he carries on with talking to the skull and about the skull, that his inner thoughts about death and Yorick and life and death actually come out, and we get to know a lot about his concept of death and decay. So, and it has to do with his contemplation, right? So we get to know the inside of his head. A very common one also is from Julius Caesar, where Anthony speaks to the corpse of Julius Caesar. Once again, if you speak to a dead person, I mean, they can't hear you. So in an apostrophe, you speak to this dead person, your inner thoughts about that person or about the incident here that's his killing come to light, and we get to know how you feel about it. Right? He says, "Oh, pardon me, thou bleeding piece of earth, that I am meek and gentle with these butchers." He's talking to the corpse. He says, sorry that I am not harsher with these people who all killed you. Thou art the ruins of the noblest man that ever lived in the tide of times. So he's also giving a bit of praise to Julius Caesar in this direct address. So we get to know how he feels. So, and he apologizes that he's not being more forceful with the men, the butchers that were responsible for the death. Now, let us look at this one just for a little exercise and see what you say. Is this an apostrophe? Let's see. Macbeth sees a dagger in the air. It's imaginary. He's hallucinating. And nobody else on stage sees the dagger. He sees it himself. So it's something that he sees. Okay. And now he addresses this something, this image, this apparition of whatever, this dagger thing that he sees in the air. And he says, "Is this a dagger which I see before me, the handle towards my hand? Come, let me clutch thee. I have thee not, and yet I see thee still. Art thou not, fatal vision, sensible to feeling as to sight? Or art thou but a dagger of the mind, a false creation, proceeding from the heat-oppressed brain?" So, now, is this an apostrophe? Let's have a look. What is he? Is there somebody addressing something? Yes, it is Macbeth addressing a lifeless thing, which was just like a concept. It's like an imagined dagger. So the fact that it's an imagined dagger doesn't make it less of something that he's addressing. It is there. It's very real to him. He says, "I'm touching you, but whenever I touch you, you go." So although it's just an imaginary thing, it is still something that he addresses. So it is definitely an apostrophe. He's addressing this dagger. And let's see whether we get to know a bit more about Macbeth's inner life, inner mind. He says, you just a product of my heat-oppressed brain. He says it is a fatal vision. So can the audience derive from this some of the things that he's thinking about? Well, he is at that moment contemplating the death of Duncan, and the dagger that he sees in his mind resembles the dagger that he has on his body. So you can see that definitely there is some kind of guilt starting to creep in, and that his brain has been oppressed by the thoughts of this contemplated murder. So it's most certainly an apostrophe. He speaks to something, to an addressee in a dramatic way, and he reveals his inner state to the audience. So most certainly an apostrophe.